All right. So last week we started talking about apologetics. And this week we are just going to pick up from where we left off. Apologetics is for those Christians who are supposed to be defending their faith with reason and evidence, and whether or not what they think is apologetics really is, or if it's just brainwashing. So welcome back to Answers from Genesis. I'm Jen, here with Ellen Bondar as we take another look at apologetics in our Addicted to God series. So we're going to stay in this section for quite a while. Is apologetics really about finding answers, or does it simply keep believers in line? Is it just a sophisticated way to brainwash people? Alan, remind us about your book real quickly before we get started again.
Sure. This series we're doing is loosely based on How to Kill God the Easy Way, a new book that I've just released. Encourage you to grab it on Amazon. It's in softcover, hardcover, and Kindle. So grab that up. It's a read that will help you really unravel so many things that you may not have ever seen as a Christian. And speaking of that, as we are journeying here in this series, you're getting some insights from Jen and myself that are not in the book. So please be a part of this. It's a lot of fun. Give us your comments as well, because we love to hear from you. Jen, I was thinking as I was going to get ready here to kind of give the interpretation of 1 Peter 3 that we left off last episode. We could have just as well called this series, two atheists teaching Christians their Bible or something like that.
Well, we have to have a name for our next series once we finish this one. So, we that might be a good one to put on the list, huh?
Right. Yeah, maybe. But at any rate, just to launch this off. So we're talking about apologetics. And apologetics basically just means to speak away or to make a defense for your view of faith, essentially. So we talked about last week how faith alone is the basic way to live as a Christian. You can't believe in God by anything but faith, because there isn't anything but faith. And so Christians want to have more substance than just faith, because the only sphere of life they live by faith is Christianity, is theism. Everything else is evidence-based. Everything else they do is empirically based. They've tested it, they've proven it, they can see it, they can taste it, they can touch it, whatever, and they know it's true. So this is it. This is the only avenue that we live by faith. And so it's uncomfortable to think that I live one area of my life different than the rest of my life. So they look for things that substantiate that faith. And so they come up with these pieces of evidence called apologetics or apologetical views. And those are the ones we're going to be talking about as we camp out in this chapter for a while and just kind of delve into it and help everybody see where they lie in the spectrum of apologetics, because every Christian has an apologetic view. You may not think you do. You may be like, I don't even know what apologetics is. You have one, trust me. So stick with us, and eventually we'll land on yours because it's in here somewhere. So you will find out. But the whole view of apologetics is based on 1 Peter 3, verse 15, which talks about making a defense for the hope that is in you when somebody asks, right? And so this whole entire world called apologetics came out of this proving God by empirical evidence. But really, this passage has nothing to do with proving the existence of God. Quite literally, the entire passage is rooted in Peter's teaching on suffering and helping the saints endure suffering. And so in this passage, Peter talks about how Christ suffered once for sins and was put to death in the body and raised in the spirit. And so Peter's saying, so you all, because you're followers of Christ, you're going to suffer too. And when you suffer for Jesus, something that nobody else can see or believe, they're going to ask you, why are you being an idiot? Why are you suffering for Jesus? And your answer, your defense, your apologia, your apologetic is because I want to be raised in the spirit just like Jesus. So I'm willing to suffer so I can be like him. That's it. That's your apologetic. It isn't some systematic defense for the existence of God. It's a response to those who question why you are willing to suffer. And your answer is, because when I get put to death, I want to be raised like Jesus. That's the argument. That's all Peter's saying in this chapter. And somehow it's become this big monster called apologetics. I don't know how that happened.
It's not the only place where Christians have taken one word and made a whole big doctrine or even theology around it. So sometimes they even make a whole doctrine of theology around a non-existent word in the Bible, like Trinity, right? But we're not going to talk about that today. But it is funny when they do take one word and and blow it up to huge proportions.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right, so let's talk real briefly about context again, because I think this is really important as we're trying to help people. And I like what you said here to the atheists teaching Christians what your Bible means, right? That's what we're going to do here, right? So, uh, in the last episode, I spoke briefly about how we should understand every passage that we look at in the Bible with the who, what, where, why, when, and how questions. Those were things that hopefully you learned as a child, but it's how we look at everything else. It's how we read our news. It's how we read a book. It's how we watch a TV series or a movie, or it's how, we listen to our children tell us what happened at school today. Everything else that we do in life revolves around these who, what, where, when, why, and how questions. So let's look again at this passage in 1 Peter. Let's assume that Peter wrote it, because we're not going to talk about all those details right now, but let's just assume that Peter wrote it. So who is he writing to? So we are taught as Christians, or when I was a Christian, right, that everything in the Bible was written, depends on what your point of view is, either written to us, right? And there even are Bible versions that put your name in all the places so you can figure out that this was a personal letter to you, which is not true. Or some people were taught it was written for us, but not to us. But that doesn't really match up either. So I really, really think it's so important that I'm going to start emphasizing this a lot, because I think this is going to help a lot of people really understand how to see the Bible in the way that is more appropriate. Okay. So 1 Peter 1 starts out, Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to, and this is the part everybody just glazes over. They don't care about this part right here, but this is the most important verse possibly of the whole book. To those who are elect exiles of the dispersion. This is why people gloss over, right? What in the world is that? This is to the those who are the elect exiles of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, according to the foreknowledge of God the Father, in the sanctification of the Spirit, for obedience to Jesus Christ, and for the sprinkling with his blood. And that's why most people gloss over that verse.
But, hey, Jen, mine has America in there too, just FYI.
So I don't see the United States there. Of course, this was 2,000 years ago. Probably didn't exist then. But so the dispersion is the key word there. And basically, these were the 10 tribes of the northern part of Israel, the 10 northern tribes, also called the House of Israel. They're called so many different things throughout the Bible, but these were when the Israelites had this fight 500, 600 years before, 650 years before Jesus came on earth. The 12 tribes of Israel basically had a fight. They were divided. The north went one place, the south went another place. Basically, they stayed in place. But so these 10 tribes were dispersed. They went different places, and they went to all these different countries. And these are basically the people that Paul is writing to. All right. These are Gentiles. We were not going to talk about that word today. But anyway, so these are tribes of Israel that have been just scattered all over the different nations. These particular nations are Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. The word nation in today's language does not mean the same as what nations meant 2,000 years ago. Again, that's an English word that we've translated it from the Greek and the Hebrew. It does not have a correct meaning. A nation, we would think United States is a nation. They're thinking 100 people is a nation. These 100 people who are related to one another, maybe 1,000. All right. It's a small group of people, and they're a very close-knit community. So it's not anywhere close to kind of what we think of as a nation. So this is who it's for, right? This is what Peter is writing to the Israelites who were scattered and living in these 4 little places. They're not even countries, really. They're just 4 little towns, I guess you could say. And 5, sorry, Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, a little bit bigger than a town, but certainly not the continent of Asia, and Bithynia. All right, that's who Peter was writing to. And he was talking about all the persecution, all the things that they were going through during this time that Alan just told us about, right? And then, so they're having all of these hardships, all of these things happening to them. They don't know what is going to happen. The only thing that they're living for is this hope that they're going to be resurrected. That's all that they have to live for, right? Their whole life is like all kinds of things happening. And it's like, okay, well, at least I know that I can see Jesus when I die again, when I die and rise again to be with Jesus, right? And that's what a lot of people think. For some reason, they read themselves into this little letter that was written to a few people 2,000 years ago, halfway around the world. It has nothing to do with us today.
Right.
It also has nothing to do with proving the existence of God.
Nope.
So, anything else we want to do on First Peter before we go on to laying a foundation for what apologetics is? Because we haven't even got to that part yet.
No. I guess the bottom line that we're establishing here is the Bible doesn't give any grounds to come up with apologetics.
That's right.
There's no reason that we even have this system of theology even in existence, because according to the Bible, faith alone is how we're supposed to live. That's it. You believe in God just because.
Yep.
Foundation of the Bible. The only people that were supposed to see the evidence apparently were Paul and the disciples, because they got to see it, and then the supposed 500 witnesses that Paul said saw Jesus. We have no evidence whatsoever or proof that any of these guys even existed. We don't have a clue. So they got the fortune of seeing this evidence, but from then on, their teachings, all of their teachings, are you all, though everybody else, we get to see it, but everybody else, you all just got to believe. It's faith alone. You just believe us. Well, that doesn't set well with Christians, I imagine. So they said, well, if they could see it, then we have to have evidence too. So they started coming up with evidence for the existence of God. And then, of course, anytime Christians tend to come up with something, they feel like they have to support it with the Bible. And so 1 Peter 3:15 seemed like a good place. And there you have it. So it almost seems like, apologetics works backwards into the Bible.
Oh, very much is.
Than the other way.
Yeah, very, very much is, right? So it's there to support an argument that doesn't even exist in the first place.
Correct.
So, but Christians believe this, and this is often the very foundation of all of their beliefs. And in your book, Alan, you talk about 3 different approaches to apologetics. And again, we're going to assume that this is foreign to most of the people listening to this. So why don't you briefly give us an overview of these 3 different approaches, and then we're going to be camping out on giving a lot of details here for however many weeks it takes us.
I talked about 3 only? I thought it was 5.
Then you tell me 5. I have listed 3 here, so maybe I go ahead. Tell me whatever that is. 5 is it 5 overall?
Well, there's classical. You're talking about the views, right? The basic.
Yes.
So there's classical, there's evidential, there's presuppositional, there's epistemological.
Epistemological.
Reformed epistemology. There's the cumulative.
Okay.
So there's actually 5 takes on it.
Okay.
In essence, probably why you thought 3, which makes sense, because only the first 3, classical, evidential, and presuppositional, are dealing with empirical evidence. Reformed epistemology deals with faith. Like I had an experience, and that's good enough.
Okay.
That in itself is proof. So that's the argument there. And then the cumulative basically says, well, clearly none of these are good enough, so let's put them all together and let's hope that 0 + 0 equals something. And at the end of the day, it still equals 0, because that's what 0 equals. So, but that's the cumulative thing. They just tried to take them all and put them together. And what you see throughout this, the irony is, all I would need is one. Just give me one argument that takes me across the finish line and proves unequivocally Yahweh is absolutely in existence and created this world. And the problem is, and simply, I can show you that none of these arguments do it by the sheer fact that there's 5 that attempt to, because none of them seem to think the other one is sufficient enough to prove that God exists. They're arguing against themselves. This is mind-boggling to me. I don't even need to make a case because they've made the case for me.
And within these five, though, we have subcategories of each one, right? So there's
yeah,
way more than five, actually.
yeah. I mean, but they all really do fall under one of the they really There's many of evidentialism, but they're all evidential arguments. They're not. It's not going to change the fact that it's an evidential argument or a classical argument. It's just. But yes, there are. But to put to your point, yes, with the subcategories, you probably have like 50 that I don't even. And there's probably more, like you said. If you have come up with one unique one, throw it in the category, throw it in the comments. We'll deal with it. But I guarantee it falls under one of these five. And at the end of the day, they're all just proving the point that none of them prove the point.
Yep.
No other way to say that.
So let's give a real brief, broad overview, and then we're going to, dig into each one, but just to give people kind of an idea of what it is that we're talking about. So I know that you just kind of briefly listed them. So for example, classical apologetics, and let me know if I'm getting this right. These are the rational arguments for the existence of God. Is that right?
Yeah. 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 I mean, they're all the first three really do use rational arguments, but I know what you mean by that. They're more yeah, I think rational is probably the best way to do it because they're not using like tangible evidences as much as they are empirical evidences that are just that you have to use rationally. Yeah, so I guess rational would be a good way of putting that, Jen.
Okay. And then for evidential, then that is the historical evidence that we have, right?
Right.
So
yeah.
I wanted to differentiate between those two just a little bit.
That's a good way.
So we kind of get an idea of where we're going with this.
Yes, that's a good way to differentiate them then. Yes, for sure.
Presuppositional, and we're going to get into the details on this, but you said that you chose presuppositional, and what's fascinating to me is that I chose not to be presuppositional. In fact, that was the entire foundation for my journey out of Christianity was anti-presuppositional. So that will be an interesting conversation when we get to that section. But that presuppositional starts with assumptions, right?
Yes. Well, if you grant that sin exists, then presuppositionalism has
right.
Yeah.
Because it's not proven that sin exists. Many people grant that God exists. And so that's where they start.
Right. But when you're a Christian, you know as well as I do, sin is it's the one thing you never even contemplate as a possible assumption or presupposition. Like at least God, even as an evidentialist, I would say, well, that's a presupposition. But with sin, it's almost like it's this. It never even falls in the category as it never even falls in the category of maybe that's a presupposition. It's just assumed to be real because we all do horrible things, and so sin is what that is. And so, as a Christian, you just never contemplate that sin might not be a thing.
All right, so we're going to have an interesting conversation when we get there because I definitely took a different road on that one than you did. But so that's great, right? Because we want to show different perspectives on this.
Yeah.
All right. And then we've got some emotional appeals.
The Reformed epistemology.
And then we've got some psychological appeals. Are those like, I had this experience?
Yeah.
Or is that more experiential appeals?
Yeah, let's put them in the same category. Yeah, those will all be Reformed epistemology.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then your last category really is just kind of combine. If you don't have enough evidence from one group, then you just combine as much as you need to give you evidence, right?
Right. Yeah. Pull them all together because maybe all of them together will do something for us.
All right. So we can see here that we really, really have a ton of ground to cover. And we're going to look at each one of this in as much detail as we feel is necessary to answer the questions that people have about this, because we really, both you and I, Ellen, we really do get a ton of questions about each one of these, right? Do you? I do anyway.
Yeah, I mean, in a matter of speaking, I mean, I don't know that I have very many where they come at me and say, hey, I want to discuss the cosmological argument. So I don't get that kind, but But in a breath,
Well, so one of the big questions is, if I'm not a Christian, doesn't matter, where I end up. Well, then, who created the world, right? That's presuppositional and cosmological.
right. So they come at us. So yes, the questions do come at us, just not in a formal way, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
Yes. Yes. But these subjects are brought up. I would say on a daily basis, I am addressing these subjects.
Oh, absolutely. The subjects, most definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Absolutely.
We're just doing it more in a logical format here. That's what we're doing.
Right. And it's the center. It's actually the center of everything. Because I mean, like I said, whether or not you consider yourself an apologist or even know or have ever heard of apologetics, you have an apologetic. You just don't realize it.
Or more than one.
Or more than one.
And I think
Correct.
that's what's going to be interesting to people to realize that, oh, well, I didn't realize, where that came from.
Right. And there may be, now that I think about it, there may actually be a sixth category that I've heard from people, and somebody who knows may throw it in the comments someday, but this actually is a sixth, and I never thought about it. It's a terrible one, but I might call it the reversal of the burden of proof argument, maybe, if I can't think of something shorter. The one where they come and they say, oh yeah, prove God doesn't exist.
Yeah.
That's an argument.
Now, would that fall in the rational one, though? I mean, it's not
maybe.
Rational, but it falls in the rational category, I would think.
I guess so. Yeah, maybe it falls in cosmological. Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah. So,
but they might.
That's a fun one. We'll have fun with that one when we get. That's probably the next episode, right? We'll get to that one.
Yeah, but they might even have like one of these pots you talked about, or one of these wheels from Egypt or whatever, and be like, "Look, this proves God exists. Prove it doesn't."
Yep, that's true. That's true.
Prove my experience doesn't prove it exists. You know what I mean? Like, no matter where you go, like, I think because there is no argument to prove or defend the existence of God, apologetics has gotten to a point where now they're just teaching people to tell atheists to prove he doesn't, and that's literally what we're left with.
And so as we go through all of these different things over the next few weeks, I want us to, as much as possible, remember that if we kind of try to keep it in context of, we're in a courtroom, two attorneys, they're each trying to prove their case, right? So let's bring that level of evidence. Would this prove the case? If one attorney came up and said, well, prove it doesn't. Well,
right.
that wouldn't win him the case in any court, right?
Right.
That they'd probably take his license away or something. I mean, that's just to that level of ridiculousness. So, I do want to keep it on, a fairly level playing field as much as possible. I don't like to play games just to win a point. That's not ever my goal here. All right. So, how does apologetics affect? We've been talking a lot about brainwashing, indoctrination, and addiction in this series, which is related to your book. How does apologetics fit into that big picture?
So in my book, I talk about three aspects of what I refer to as the big monster, and three aspects of the little monster. The little monster being addiction, and the things that feed into that. It's not really the major issue that we're dealing with in Christianity, any more than any other drug or addiction that anybody may have. The symptoms for that, the withdrawal, and the draw for that is very, very mild. Actually, that the addiction's never really the primary issue. It's the brainwashing that makes you think you actually need and want that addiction or whatever it is. And so the withdrawal symptoms from relieving any addiction is typically mild. Actually, it's the brainwashing that every time you start to get away from it, you're drawn back to it, and this tells you need it because your brainwashing says I need that, and so your body starts to feel what your mind says you need. So it really is a battle here more than it is anything else in any sort of addiction. So brainwashing is the big monster. That's the big issue that you need to deal with. So if you can remove the brainwashing that makes you think you need something that you actually don't need, and that's actually harmful for you, once you can get rid of that, then the addiction just kind of falls away because you're just like, well, I don't want that. it's not hard to not do something you don't want to do. Suddenly that just becomes easy. So it's the mind that's the problem. So the way that this fits in is that apologetics is a brainwashing problem. Um, it feeds the Christian into thinking that there's actually evidence for God when there actually isn't. And so as long as you think that there's some substance to your faith other than just faith, then you're going to hold on to this because you're like, oh God, there's no way I could deny God. Look all around. Just look at the world, Alan. Just look around you. It just evidence everywhere. It just proves God exists. How can you possibly deny all of this stuff around you? I hear that all the time. You know, it's
all
just,
the time.
Alan, you're an idiot because, and they might not say in those terms, but I'm the mean guy because I say there's no evidence for this of God. Oh, you must be stupid. Just look around you. It's everywhere. You know what I'm saying? Like, and it's frustrating because I get that kind of attitude, that kind of derogatory attitude from Christians all the time. They don't even realize they're doing it because they're so brainwashed into thinking this is just obvious. God exists. And so I'm supposed to see that too. Like that's an argument or something. But that's what brainwashing does. It just makes you think there's more substance than there is.
Okay. So I think there are some other things that are going on here with how apologetics fits in with Christian brainwashing that Christians don't want to hear about, but it's important to understand. And so one of those things is not only circular reasoning, circular logic, but circular reinforcement. So apologetics, which again is built on nothing, right? And it's really giving a defense for something that they believe, but it's based on circular reasoning, it's based on circular logic. And if they keep saying those same things that are brainwashing, so brainwashing is saying the same things over and over and over, or hearing the same things over and over and over, or doing the same things over and over again, right? That's a brainwashing as part of that. So when we keep hearing those things over and over and over, as far as the apologetics go, then what is happening there with the believers is that they are now prioritizing belief over the evidence, of which they have none, because their evidence is only the circular argument. So the argument is circular and the reinforcement is circular, and that is the brainwashing. And so everything just becomes this closed loop, and it's playing over and over and over and over and over, and they can't get out of that loop.
Mm-hmm.
So what you see?
Oh, absolutely. It's the Christian matrix. And I deal with that throughout the entire book, actually. And it's the same reason Christians believe the Bible. I mean, the Bible says God exists because God said the Bible said so, and the Bible said God said exists, and therefore God exists. It's like, and you can't get out of it because you've not had the opportunity to step a foot outside of that to see what else is out there. You're completely and utterly brainwashed to only see this one life. You're stuck inside this. Apologetics does the exact same thing. It's just like you said, it just reinforces this belief over and over again. And there's actually nothing there, but you can't see that there's nothing there because you're trapped in a matrix.
Now, another thing I saw in Christianity is that, we have different terms like pastor, teacher, elder, prophet, all these kind of deacon, all these different kinds of terms, and they held some level of authority and stuff. But sometimes you see people who are called apologists. And what do Christians think about apologists? Are they, how do they see them? Is that just like, the person passing the basket for getting money? Or is that somebody who knows even more than the pastor? Is that on like a seminary level? Where would you kind of rank them, an apologist?
Yeah, they would definitely be the intellectuals of our society. They're the ones that really got the good education. They're the ones who study hard. They're the professionals. They know what they're talking about. They just basically live their lives proving all the atheists wrong, and they're so effective at it. I've seen these debates; they're just really good at it. I just trust them because, man, I've seen them tear up these atheists.
So they're the ones that even the pastors go to for help, right? They're the experts that the pastors go to.
Yeah, assuming you're not also considering yourself an apologist as a pastor, which I did, so I didn't need to go.
But you still looked up to certain people. I've heard you talk about John Piper.
Of course. Just playing, of
R.C.
course.
Sproul, there were certain people, R.C. Sproul is a good one, right? He was one of the apologists that I certainly looked up to, and I put a lot more weight on something that he said just because it was him,
Correct.
right? So
Yes, funny you say that. I even have a Christian friend of mine recently that said to me, well, you're not going to hear anything I have to say because if you don't believe R.C. Sproul, then my word's not going to matter. That's how elevated he is. And I was like, what?
exactly. So we get all kinds of people who put all of their trust actually in these apologists because they are considered the experts. So there's a book, The Case for Christ. Now, is that that's Josh McDowell?
Lee
No,
Strobel.
Lee Strobel. Lee Strobel. So for some reason, Christians kind of put him in the apologetic expert category, right?
Him and Josh McDowell.
Josh McDowell, Reasons Why We Believe, and all that kind of stuff. So there's
Right.
depending on what your beliefs are, will depend on who you pick as your expert, right? But these experts are what we would call apologists. And so I wonder how many times the majority of Christians have taken what these expert apologists have said and actually compared it to the Bible, and then actually compared that to facts, evidence, grammar, all kinds of stuff, right? Or do we just take their word without question? There's my timer.
Already. Holy cow. Yeah, that next episode then.
All right. Did you want to say anything to answer that question before we run?
No, because we're out of time. We're going to stick to it.
All right. So just like with any addiction that you need to quit, once the brainwashing has been removed, you just pick a time and you stop.
Yeah. But don't leave yet. Please subscribe, like, drop a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Join our fast-growing community on Facebook. Check out the link below, Life After Christianity community. We'd love to have you over there.
All right. And until next time, question your faith with